I am Jean-Claude Berrouet. I am pleased to introduce this regional Argentine Malbec tasting guide by 5 of the top world's Master Sommeliers and Master of Wine. Doug Frost, Rebecca Fineman, Case Golden, Brian Kozial, Evan Goldstein. Each of them will focus on one of the 5 different growing areas from southern region to the northeast region, offering their knowledge. I have been working in Argentina for 8 years. I discovered a great diversity of terroir. Thank you for joining us and please enjoy the tasting.
Well, hello. I want to drink some Malbec today. I don't know about you, but Malbec is on the mind. And we're going to taste this Malbec in a second, but please, a little patience first. We get to enjoy the benefits of technology here by looking at my funny stereoscopic slide here of Italian workers in the fields. But these Italian workers happen to be Italian workers working in the fields in Argentina. I bring that up always because I find myself needing to explain to people that while we're focused on a specific individual spot within Argentina, and to step back a little bit and make sure we all understand, when it comes to understanding the way in which Argentine viticulture has unfolded and the way in which the place itself has adopted wine, I think it's important to imagine that it's not just that the vineyard areas, up in here, the classic areas that we talk about within Mendoza are populated by people who've been making wine there for a couple of centuries. It's that Argentina, because it was a Latin country, because it was a Spanish founded country, as we understand its history, we forget that in fact, the largest immigrant community in Argentina is Italian. And the Italians, well, you want people to drink wine. The Spanish are pretty good at it. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the Italians are even better at it. And so understanding that wine is part and parcel of the cultural life here, I think is really important. I think it's critical to understanding how it all works. Now, can we be honest? While we'll certainly talk about capital cities and cultural centers within Argentina, and Buenos Aires has its own particular milieu. Let me just explain it this way. There are a lot of jokes that you can tell in Argentina about porteños. Basically, like the dumb one I always remember is, how did the porteño decide to commit suicide? He climbed up on top of his own ego and jumped off. Okay, so the porteño, the people of Buenos Aires are considered these cultured, sophisticated, and dare we say, slightly conceited folks. But it reflects a time not that long ago, certainly in the early to mid 20th century, when Argentina was one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Certainly highly educated, very sophisticated. And so it is that our understanding of wine in Argentina, I think, needs to be more nuanced, or at least have more layers to it as we grapple with this idea of the Italians just drinking wine every day because that's what they do, and this sophisticated city where wine is coming from all over the world and is exalted and understood in many ways, I think helps us get a little bit of a grasp on how it is that Argentina is becoming much more than just Malbec, okay? And I'm not putting Malbec down. Obviously, I'm here to drink some today, but it is possible for it to become much more than Malbec, because Malbec is a wonderful everyday drinking wine for much of the 20th century, but other grapes were grown there too. Now, the primary grape for a long time was just Torrentes, the simple white that's kind of a country white, and that again reflects, if you will, this Italian heritage of wine being an everyday beverage and a nice simple drink. If you go back even further in time, if you go back to the early mid 19th century, 18th centuries, before that, wine itself in the sophisticated city centers is not at all sophisticated. So it's the mid 20th century when that changes. What were they drinking back in those days? Believe it or not, they were drinking wine that had been shipped often to Cuba, distilled down into some sort of grappa, and then shipped and then reconstituted as best they could, add water added, maybe a little bit of dehydrated grapes and things like that. Seriously, that's what they thought wine was. The people who drank real wine were the peasantry. They were the people who actually made wine and just drank it because it was illegal for them to make wine and sell it. Now, were they doing so? Oh, there's this incredible article I read once about comparing the amount of wine that was probably made and the amount of wine that the church was allowed to make for sacramental purposes. You could also sell it because, the first son becomes the business person, the second son becomes the priest, and sometimes they would do business together. And so it's a crazy article that shows how much wine was flowing through the church and being sold. And again, that was real wine. People actually had most of the time Malbecs that and other reds that they were growing and making. So fast forward all the way to today. And what Argentina has wisely done is diversified, if you will. Clearly, we've been focused in on these places. And yeah, you're going to have a chance to, within this group of videos, to taste Salta Malbec, which is its own thing as well. But we wanted to show you not just Patagonian Malbec, because that is its own thing too. Certainly, when we talk about Patagonia, it's a fairly complicated place. It's not just what I'm about to talk about here, not just to talk about Rio Negro and this particular spot there, and it is this larger thing, and it's varied, of course, as you would imagine. And it is certainly not as simple as just saying Patagonia. In fact, the existence of this particular winery, Wapisa, part of the Finca Patagonias group, is that it is a new spot. It's a coastal spot of Patagonia. Most of these vineyards in Rio Negro and in the other parts of Patagonia, including Chubut, are higher in elevation. They're farther up in the foothills of the Andes, and that usually works. That's why Mendoza is such a special place. It's certainly why Salta is a special place. But as other countries have learned, if you're trying to make really good wine, you need to be in a place where it's warm enough to ripen the grapes. Then you need to be in a place that's cool enough that you have, diurnal shifts, which you can get either by getting up into high elevation sites, which, okay, we get that, or by the coast. So here we are in a coastal setting when we're talking about this particular place, and so I just wanted to take a moment to do that. It helps me to look at maps. I'm that kind of guy that needs to look a little bit at maps and get a sense of where the place is itself. Wapisa is only about 25 miles from the ocean, and the Atlantic Ocean obviously has an impact, and that impact is going to be to cool temperatures off at night. But in talking with Fabian, the winemaker here, it was curious to me that when we actually started looking at those individual temperatures and talking about the difference in temperatures, they were certainly different than what you see in Mendoza, but not tremendously different. It wasn't one of those things where it was a radical shift from what was happening there. What is certainly different is the soil. Limestone clay, calcareous underpinning for vines is something we talk about all the time. We consider its importance in so much as it tends to intensify acidity in the resultant wine. And so for my little drink here today, my view and my hope as I tasted this wine initially, I mean, I've had the wine before, but every time I taste it, I come back to this idea of, right, did we keep acids? Do we have acids? Is the pH in a good place? And for me, that is what's exciting about the development within Argentina and the development with Malbec. I have to admit to an evolving understanding of Malbec I have to admit to an evolving understanding of every frickin' wine. Okay. But Malbec is not alone in that, but it is that for a long time, my view on Malbec was simply that it was a grape that didn't do particularly well in Southwest France where it's native. I mean, most of those wines I found a bit hard, a bit intense and tannic. And Guy Accad is from that area, and Accad famously was the winemaker who really promoted the idea of cold maceration, of in other words, pre-alcoholic maceration, because alcohol is a solvent. It can extract a whole bunch of stuff, including tannin. Well, we wanted to get color without tannin in order to make a good red wine, in order to soften some of those really kind of beastly wines that you saw in Cahors, the black wine, as it was called centuries ago. And so Accad adopted this rather revolutionary method going back 30 and 40 years ago of cold maceration. Take the grapes, make them very cold, sulfur the hell out of them, frankly, was his methodology. So no fermentation is going to happen. And then just let that color soak out and hopefully some flavor as well. It worked very well for Cahors and certainly has changed what Cahors now represents. And so I've kind of had to eat my words, because I felt like Cahors was not the best expression of Malbec. And somehow, magically, mysteriously, Malbec in this high elevation environment in Mendoza and around there could do all these wonderful things. And it wasn't a clonal thing. It wasn't even really winemaking. It was grape growing. And my theory was that it was not just this place. It was this place's altitude. When you get to higher altitude, I know it seems like a small matter to most people, but when you go from sea level to 3,000 feet, you're dealing with a different set of UV light rays. And the grape skin is a protection. It provides protection around the seed, which is the purpose of the plant. So that the plant's trying to ripen the seed, it needs protection. Grape skins grow thicker at this higher elevation. Now, I'm saying all this just to say, here's what's really fun about the Wapisa, is that my idea goes to shit, okay? Basically, not completely, but can we be honest? It's like, okay, we know Mendoza Malbec has all this great color. Well, this is 25 miles from the ocean, and it's basically, 100 meters elevation. There's no color problem here. There's a lot of color here. All right. So maybe the I don't know. I'm just going to stop there and say, maybe I don't know. Maybe this is why I love wine, is because I'm constantly getting my hat handed to me to say, you think you know? You don't know. So we come back to this wine. Plenty of color. So clearly the grape grows in a similar fashion to Mendoza, even though it's at much lower elevation here next to the ocean. Certainly being next to the ocean, as I said earlier, I expect fierce, retention of acidity in a way that we're not going to see up in those elevated sites. Now, certainly Mendoza is getting to its cooler places, and so acidity is improving in those wines. But let's taste. And there's no question for me that this wine has, for me, distinct acidity, that it has that drying character at the end that's not drying tannins, that's not just all spice and wood and things like that. Instead, it is an issue of a cranberry note coming in here, a black cherry, but a desiccated black cherry coming in. The blueberry and blackberry notes that you expect out of Malbec are there, but it is, for me, it's a well-balanced wine and a more succulent kind of wine, Malbec, than I usually associate with the higher elevations and the more, classic areas here. The ending of the wine, for me, the finish of the wine really is succulent. I use that word in the way that something tangy makes you want to drink more. And I love that. Now, I mentioned Guy Accad as this person who revolutionized Malbec and frankly revolutionized Pinot Noir and some Syrahs and places like, other grapes like that in other places. This is made in a cold maceration method as well. So that may explain part of the reason why the color is so vibrant here. But I also think that we're in the Southern Hemisphere, and we know that UV light can be more intense down there. So I'm trying to rescue myself here. I'm basically trying to say, well, I was not completely wrong. I don't know. The other thing about being next to the ocean is, I don't know if you know this, but Wapisa is doing this whole crazy thing where they take this wine. They have some extra bottles of the 2017 Malbec, and they've dumped it at the bottom of the ocean. Now, I'm joking. It's only off the coast, so it's only 10, 15 meters down, but down there with the great whites and such. And talking to Fabian, he said, after 7 months under the water, it tasted distinctly different. And that's another, huh? Really? I don't know. I've tasted one wine that's been experimented with in this way. I have not gotten to taste the Wapisa that's been underwater, but it's two things. One is, why not? You're right there. So that's cool. Maybe there is a difference that can be relied upon. Two is, if nothing else, it helps us mark in our minds how distinctly different coastal Argentine Malbec can be, ought to be, and in this case, is, because coastal hasn't really been done yet. I really have been excited for a long time about wines of Rio Negro. And yes, this is very close to the Rio Negro, but it's more about being next to the ocean, whereas most of the exciting Rio Negro wines are grown near the river, but as I said earlier, quite elevated. So I am quite fond of this wine because, in general, my tendency with wines that I like to drink tend to be, get me under 14% alcohol. This is under 14% alcohol. Not that it's a magic number. It's just that if a wine is 15.5, I can't drink as much of it as if a wine is 13.9, okay? Like this wine. And I'm here to drink wine. That is a strong purpose in my life, damn it. So thank you. Thank you for joining.
Good afternoon. I'm Brian Koziol, Master Sommelier, and today we're going to talk about the renaissance that's happening in Argentina, and most specifically in Mendoza, where site-specific wines have really become not something that is being done by a few people, but definitely emerging across the entire region. So let's get started here to really talk about the journey. How did we get to site-specific wines here in Argentina? And when we think about the country just as a whole, we have a long, rich history of the course of grape cultivation that happening in the country. It goes all the way back to the 16th century. I think what is unique here is, wines are being made in the 16th century, 17th, 18th century. In the 1850s, we get the influx that comes through in the course of a lot of immigrants, and as a result, they were challenged, and we get the first bringing over in the course of Vitis vinifera grape varietals, European grape varietals coming in the course of Argentina and into Mendoza. Malbec was one of those grape varietals. And what's important to understand here, because this is some of the fundamentals that still play through the course of the viticultural practices that are happening in the course of the country, is these grapes that come over are Vitis vinifera pre-phylloxera Europe. And as a result, the grapes that are planted throughout the course of the country to get the course of these vineyards started are Vitis vinifera grapevines with natural Vitis vinifera rootstocks. And so today, because of the isolation that happens within the course of this country from the Andes and the Atlantic, you get this culture or this viticultural culture that has preserved these grapevines, so that you don't have phylloxera coming through. You don't have to graft over onto the course of the American rootstocks. So that the plantings that are throughout the course of the country are indigenous to the course of the whole of what started down the path back in the 1850s, which is something special up and down the course of the entire country. Then, as things start moving along, the immigrants that are there, they had a thirsting for the course of wine with the course of their daily life, and as a result, the country produced wine to quench that thirst of the locals. And most of the wine then that's being produced through the course of the country at this time, back in the 1850s and into the early 20th century here, is bulk wine, what we know as table wine. Things really take a shift here in the course of the late 1970s, early 1980s, where some social and some political crises are happening. As a result, the entire wine industry, which had worked itself into being basically the fifth, sixth largest producing wine country in the entire world, collapses. To get the industry going back on its feet, the country started to look for an economic way, and how could the wine industry help them economically? And they shifted gears towards the export market. Now, the people there were definitely, I'd say, true to the course of themselves. They knew their capabilities, and as a result, they knew that producing fine wine for the export market was definitely not a thing for them. So they branched out to the course of consultants. The fine winemakers were happening from the course of Europe into the course of Australia, New Zealand. Argentina then was one of these countries that embraced it as well. You have some great winemakers that worked their way into the course of Argentina. And what they discover is those indigenous vitis vinifera vines. They see great plant material. They see this uniqueness of high elevation because of the Andes Mountains that really can influence the course of viticulture, which can lead itself to having great grapes. And they definitely said fine wine could be made. And so in the 1990s, a shifting happens from bulk wine to fine wine. And that sends this renaissance out. And then what happens with the course of fine wine around the course of the world is everyone thirsts for finding places where you can really accentuate site-specific wines. And what's happening then in the 1990s is not only is there this renaissance happening, but there's also a change in the guard. There's a lot of new generation that's coming through the course of the established wineries that made itself through the course of the crisis. There's an influx of, foreign currency and foreign expertise that's coming to the course of the region. And so as a result, you take a foundation of passionate people with curiosity because of this new generation and a culture of people. The Argentinian people don't rest on their laurels. They're definitely a proud culture. And so they push themselves into what else can we do? So they start to expand out and explore to find more sites to grow grapes. Mendoza, the center of the course of the winemaking culture in the course of Argentina, is really the hallmark for this renaissance and the hallmark for terroir site-specific driven wines. When we think about Mendoza, we got a few things going on. So just to lay the land here is, we have high elevation. We have vineyards that alluvial soils. We have a long growing season. We have intense sunlight. We have something called a diurnal shift. And that's important here because that shift allows this semi-arid dry climate where we're irrigating off the course of the snow belt from the course of the area. That diurnal shift really allows a nice growing season. That sunshine allows that Malbec to get a really hardy style skin so that it really can produce a really deep color. The polyphenols and the aromatic compounds that are there really become intensified because of this diurnal shift. And the other unique thing that we have here is we have the Zonda wind that comes down that really helps the area be really, with the humidity, it's basically pest free for the course of an appellation, which makes it be great for just general winemaking, but then for fine wine, without a doubt. Where is fine wine being grown? So if we look at Mendoza to the east, there's an appellation called Maipu, really good quality wines. I think that's what really started the people to enjoy Argentinian wines. It's red fruit, voluptuous, very, very velvety. I mean, it's a great bottle of wine. And then as you move yourself around, there's a place called Luján de Cuyo. And then really where this site-specific sites are being accentuated is a place called Valle de Uco, where we're talking extreme growing conditions, high elevation. And this is where the country then starts to embrace this idea of a geographic indication, or a GI, site-specific wines. And now we start getting in Mendoza where there's roughly over 100 throughout the entire country of these GIs. There's at least over 30 GIs with single sites that started by political areas, but today they're really carved out because of soil, temperature, rainfall, sunlight, differences that are happening to make these site specifics. And one of the hallmark site specific places, one of the first was a place called La Consulta. And La Consulta sits in the Valle de Uco in a place called San Rafael, or San Carlos, my apology. So down in San Carlos. And this area, La Consulta, is synonymous with, of course, a terrain that is alluvial soils. We're sitting at roughly about over 3,000 feet above sea level. So it has that great sun exposure. You have the Andes in the distance right there. In addition to that, there's the San Jose volcano. I think its last eruption was back in the 1960s. So that creates this unique extra microclimate area within the course of La Consulta. And to talk about these wines, I've brought in the course of being able to taste a wine produced by a winery called Alta Cedro. Now, Alta Cedro is made by one of these avant-garde winemakers who really emerged in the 1990s and early 2000s, named Karim Moussi. And Karim, he focuses his winemaking on La Consulta. His father was one of those bulk grape growers that was throughout the course of the 20th century there. And he really encouraged Karim to seek out La Consulta, as that's the place where his father believed fine quality wine was going to have its roots here in the course of Argentina. So let's taste the Alta Cedra Reserve Malbec 2017. It is definitely a hallmark styled wine for the course of La Consulta. And so this wine, when I look at the color to get started here, I take my thumb here. And with the course of my thumb, I'm going to really look at it. It's hard to really see through the course of my thumb. The wine's opaque, it's deep, it's purple, it's densely concentrated, which is a characteristic not only of Malbec just in general in Mendoza, but definitely a hallmark character for the course of La Consulta. The viscosity here in the course of the wine, we got big legs, leaving myself thinking that I definitely have some alcohol happening here, high alcohol. There's concentration within those tears coming down from the extraction for the course of the skins, because the berries here are really, really thick skin with a little bit of juice that's right there, and some nice extraction that happens in the course of his winery here, where he has concrete tank fermenters, so he gets good extraction, cool fermentation that's happening here. Aromatic-wise, wow, the wine has, when I first really think it's ripe fruit. It's a powerful wine just on the nose with its aromatics. I'm thinking black cherry, black raspberry, blackberry characteristics, black fruit versus lower in elevation. You're getting more red fruit that happens in the course of Mendoza. So black fruit dominated. And the fruit here, the condition is, it's kind of like has this nice little liqueur quality to it of character that's there. And then as it plays out on the course of on the aromatics here, get a little minerality that alluvial soils kind of play through, but very faint, definitely a fruit-forward style wine. There's some oak here because this is Reserva. Country as a designation has some terminology. Reserva has to be at least 1 year in oak. Karim takes it a little bit further in the course of its aging. Grand Reserva is 2+ years in the course of vessel there, so that is standard for the course of the country. So something to look out when the course of read labels of the course of Argentinian wines. And then in addition to that, floralness, violets, purple flowers really kind of lift the course out of the course of the glass. Probably little chocolatey notes, and we got that French oak there, that vanilla, nutmeg, baking spices that shine through. Let's taste. Doesn't disappoint. Powerful aromatics, powerful in the course of my palate as well. Lots of power, dry wine, full bodied. Those dark fruits shine through, the blackberry, the cassis, the black cherry, blackberry quality, black raspberry. A little bit of that minerality component there. Oak on this wine, French oak, vanilla, nutmeg, spices here. The tannin profile here, we've got high tannins. And that's the unique thing is these tannins are very firm tannins. They're definitely well-structured tannins, which in the combination of this moderate plus acidity that's kind of shining through on the course of my palate is, this is going to give this wine some, definitely some ageability to it. It also opens the door in the course of food. It's a wine that is craving the course of the local asados, that social barbecue gathering where you got these amazing grills with hot coals and succulent meats, chorizo, and of course a little tiny little bit of vegetables that play out there. This wine craves for that characteristic of cuisine right there. As to really kind of round out the course of that tannin structure, that food here to tame it. In addition to that, here on the course of my palate, I get that chocolatey note, that mocha, dark chocolate quality to it. As I mentioned, moderate plus acidity. It's definitely it's a big wine with the course of the character. It fills my cavity here, so alcohol is moderate plus of that high. Really long finish. What's unique is on the nose, I had that liqueur quality, but on the palate, it's not that really ripeness of fruit, but it of the liqueur quality. But as I sat here talking, really the finishes with the nice little sweet black fruits kind of shining through for this wine. And so this wine, as I mentioned, goes great with an asado. Have this with the course of grilled meat at home. If you're a vegetarian, try a portobello mushroom that's been marinated with some balsamic and just grill that. This wine will definitely pair up with the meatiness of the course of that portobello mushroom. Be a nice pairing there. And in addition to that, I think that this wine can lend itself towards more fuller bodied style cheeses, hard cheeses. This is a 2017 vintage wines. Good solid vintage. This is, as you move yourself into the Valle de Uco, as you move into the course of the vintages, 2017 rock solid, 16 probably a little bit more. Really watch your producers right there. 2018 going to be another good solid vintage, but wait for the course of the 2019s. They're supposed to be blockbuster. Probably one of the best vintages of the entire decade. And with that, just to summarize, La Consulta, a great GI appellation within the Valle de Uco, sub-region of Mendoza. So.
My name is Rebecca Fineman. I am based in San Francisco, where I have a restaurant and a wine shop called Ungrafted. So if you're ever in the area, please come by and visit. I'm also a Master Sommelier with the Court of Master Sommeliers, having passed in 2017. I am thrilled to be discussing the Uco Valley today. The Uco Valley is the youngest wine growing area in all of Mendoza. But before I dive into the Uco Valley, I need to give a quick recap on winemaking history in Mendoza. So the Spanish brought the Criolla Chica, which is also known as the mission grape, to Argentina in the 1500s. Just as in North America, this was the first vinifera vines coming to South America. And over the next 100 years, there were many more settlers from both Spain and also Italy coming to Argentina. And with them, they brought their own native vines and winemaking traditions. In 1861, there was a huge earthquake in Mendoza. It devastated the city. They had to fully rebuild it afterwards. By 1885, a railway line was constructed, making possible to trade between Mendoza and Buenos Aires. And this is really important because it really helped revamp the whole winemaking industry. And by the early 1900s, winemaking was thriving in Mendoza. But it wasn't until the 1990s that people started to plant grapes in the Uco Valley. It was always thought to be too cold, too much of a desert, and too high in elevation. So in other words, all of the things that used to make it an undesirable place to plant vines now make it one of the most coveted areas in all of Argentina. So the Uco Valley is about an hour to an hour and a half southwest of Mendoza, just west of the Tunuyan River at the foot of the Andes and the Tupungado volcano. It boasts the highest elevations in all of Mendoza, climbing up up to 5,000 feet, but a lot of the vineyards hover around 3,500 feet. And it also has lower average daily temperatures, which are around 57 degrees Fahrenheit. As with all of Mendoza, irrigation is a must. Irrigation channels come from the Andes, which then funnel through the Tunuyán River and other rivers. But this is a desert. It's desert land. There are a lot of sunny days. There's virtually no rain, but there's also a really strong diurnal swing. That means hot daytime temperatures, but very, very, very cold nights. So the high elevations all throughout the valley, along with the cool nights, help delay ripening, and they also help the grapes hold on to acid. And this is part of what makes the wines from the area so special. In terms of geology, there are a lot of distinct soils in the Uco Valley. There's alluvial stones, which really are deposits from the rivers. So they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. There's also chalk, there's sand, there's clay, there's limestone and gravel, there's sedimentary rock. This variety of soils and all the different levels of elevation make the Uco a really great place for a number of grapes to thrive. So for white grapes, you see a lot of Semillon and Chardonnay, and I've seen Chardonnay in both still and sparkling forms from the Uco Valley. There's Bonarda, which is otherwise known as Charbonneau or Corbeau. There's really great renditions of Cabernet Franc. There's Cabernet Sauvignon, Tempranillo, Pinot Noir, and of course, Malbec. And what I love about the Uco Valley is the thoughtfulness that comes from its winemakers. With all of these distinct microclimates, there are really two approaches to winemaking in play. The first focus on distinct terroirs. So we're starting to see a lot of bottles with single places on the label, La Consulta, Paraje, Altamira, Los Chaquies, and so on. The second approach is to showcase the Uco Valley as a whole by selecting grapes from throughout the region. And this is what Pepe Galante is doing with Putamun. So it's impossible to talk about Argentina and its wine without talking about Pepe Galante. He is rightly regarded as the father of modern winemaking in Argentina. Not only was he the head winemaker at Catena Zapata for 34 years, he also helped make people realize that Argentina, and Mendoza specifically, is capable of making world-class wines. So Putamun was founded in 2010 by Pepe Galante and his family. The name means harvest in the Mapuche language, which is the indigenous peoples who lived on the land before the Spanish came. It also means search. And this is what Pepe Galante is doing with his wine. He selects Malbec from different parts of the Uco Valley at different levels of elevation and from different soils, as he knows that each area is going to add its own level of complexity into the bottle of wine. There's no formula. Each year is different, with the only goal being to shine a spotlight on the grape and the Uco Valley as a whole. Pepe Galante practices sustainable farming. Harvest is done by hand. The grapes are all manually sorted so that only the best ones make it into a bottle. The vines are on average 18 years of age. And as vines age, the yield becomes smaller and smaller, but the quality is greater. The Uco Valley is personally my favorite area in all of Mendoza. It's very distinct, and it's also a real surprise for people who expect Malbec to just be one thing. I see it all the time. Guests in my restaurant, they try a Malbec from the Uco Valley and they say, I never thought Malbec tastes like that. And the Putamun, the Reserva Malbec, is a really classic rendition of Uco Valley Malbec. It's pretty with red, black, and blue fruits. There's plums and blackberries and strawberry even. There are light herbal notes like mint and tarragon, and it's a really floral wine. And this is something I really love from the Uco Valley Malbecs. There's lilac and lavender. The wine on the palate is medium to medium plus body, and it's a lot lighter on its toes than its counterparts in the warmer parts of Mendoza. The alcohol in this wine is just under 14%. So it has the structure to hold up to heavier meat dishes, but I had this with roast chicken and vegetables the other night, and it didn't disappoint. So this is the 2016 Putamun Reserva Malbec made by Pepe Galante in the Uco Valley. I encourage you all to open up a bottle of this as soon as you can. It's a really incredible wine made by one of the nicest and hardworking men you'll ever meet.
Hi, everyone. Keith Goldston here, and I'm super excited because I get to talk about one of my favorite regions in Argentina, and that is Agrello. So, we're in Mendoza, in the heart of Mendoza, and a quick digression for me, it was always kind of shocking because I was thinking, first time going to Argentina, I'm going to Mendoza, and thinking it was going to be like Napa Valley. No, completely off. Mendoza is this huge province, and then Mendoza itself is a city of about almost 1 million people. And then you don't even get to like the prime vineyards, which kind of start in the subregion of Luján de Cuyo, and then Agrello, the subregion within that subregion, till about 30 minutes south of the actual town of Mendoza. And it was not until I actually got there that it started to feel like, this is kind of that heart of the wine area. So when you just say Mendoza, realize it is a huge place. So when we are now starting to talk about these like subregions, Luján de Cuyo, Agrello, Valle de Uco, which on this another side note is actually pretty huge in itself. But when you actually start to talk about these regions, they do have significance. And I'm honored and thrilled to talk about Agrello. It's interesting to me because we probably wouldn't think about Argentina wine the way we do if it wasn't for this part of Mendoza. It's interesting that there's just so much about Valle de Uco now, even the high elevation vineyards up in Capachate and Salta, whether it's down low, further south vineyards in Patagonia. It's like everyone always wants to talk about the new kids or the grass is greener, but we never would have gotten there if it wasn't for these amazing wines coming out of this part of Argentina. So you have the Andes, which are epic in their scope and scale. And I really can't sum up enough to you. You have to see them in person. If anyone's ever been lucky enough to see the Rockies, basically imagine doubling those. And that's what we're talking about with the Andes in terms of height. So they're absolutely humbling. They kind of put everything in its place. And elevation absolutely affects the vineyards. And Mendoza, Luján, Agrello are kind of in this sweet spot where they're not necessarily at the base of the Andes themselves. They're kind of at the base of the foothills of the Andes. So Uco is about 4,500 feet elevation. Most of Agrello is right around 3,000 feet. So definitely lower, but it's also kind of the sweet spot because if you're familiar with, like, say, Napa Valley, you have either hillside or valley floor, but everyone in the industry knows like the best vineyards and like the most expensive land are the ones that are not necessarily hillside or valley floor, but like right in the middle. And that Goldilocks zone, that Rutherford Bench, Tocolon Vineyard. And to me, that's what Agrello kind of fits in the scope of Argentina. And the wines kind of have this combination of, kind of the florality and lift that you see with some of the higher elevation wines, but then they also have the power and structure that just comes with that perfect ripening. And if I would guess, I bet the growing seasons is probably a few days longer than some of those other spots because they probably start a little bit sooner and the days don't get quite as hot. Because that's the other thing is you go up in elevation, you get much more intense sunlight and hotter days. Anyways, going back into Agrello, this is a tiny little spot. To me, it's one of the few spots in Argentina that you can tell wine is something serious there because it's winery and tourism. And, the town of Agrello itself is nothing much, but you're going there because this is where there's some of the best wineries in the whole country. And as you drive by, it's just like, there's so-and-so, there's so-and-so. Oh, I know them. I've seen that. So it's definitely kind of like, location, location, location. That is what Agrello is to Mendoza. And 3,000 feet elevation, as I mentioned, you have this beautiful alluvial fan of soils that have come off the Andes for thousands upon thousands of years. Very deep soils. There's a few spots where they have some 80, 100-year-old vines that the roots have actually gone down almost close to 50, 60 feet down. And then what's really cool is you have all this rocks and gravel. And I just laugh a little bit because I've gone into some of like some soil pits in some of the vineyards there. And it's just almost like polka dotted with rocks. It's like this perfect kind of sandy loam. And then these like rocks polka dotted throughout the soil. And it just makes me laugh because like, Chambertin and Burgundy, Montrachet and Burgundy, they're like exactly 55% rocks to soil. And this is to me almost that exact same percentage when you just kind of look at it. So it's just fascinating that how grapevines, particularly ones for very high quality wine, seem to love that mix of rocks and soil. And Agrello is perfect for that. It's also super easy to grow grapes here. You get almost 350 days of sunlight every year. Hardly any rain, so you don't have to worry about pests, mold, fungus, any of that. And you have the wind blowing almost daily coming down off the Andes. So it's just this perfect nirvana to do grapes really, really well. Stylistically, as I mentioned, it's not the new cool kid, but it is, like, if I had to go, what is like the textbook definition of Argentine Malbec? Or why does Argentine Malbec so much better than the French? It's because the wine's coming out of like this area, and big, full-bodied, but super drinkable. So when we talk about textbook Argentine Malbec and why this can kind of fit on the world-class stage, I have to digress a little bit and talk a little bit about the culture of Argentina, because I think it's important to the wines. First there's, enjoying that Fernet con cola with you and your mates before you go out for the night. And also, two quick side note, if you are a, senior dinner person, this is not the country for you. I mean, there's some restaurants that don't even open in Buenos Aires till midnight at their first seating. So if you cherish sleep, this is not a country for you. Or if you're a vegetarian, you probably want to avoid it as well, because there is so much beef consumed. It is epic and amazing. But the other thing that is also part of the culture there is football. And you could definitely make the argument that Messi is the greatest footballer of all time. But there's something about Maradona, Diego Maradona, that if you're not familiar with, first off, you should go watch the documentary on HBO. It's amazing. But there's just something about this fiery little kid who came out of basically the ghetto of Buenos Aires and then became like the most influential footballer in the world. And there was one World Cup match where he basically took over and won the game for Argentina against England. There is the infamous hand of God goal, and then there was another goal they scored. So they won 2-0. He provided both goals. The hand of God goal is the one that gets talked about the most. And it's this amazing thing where he goes up for the ball, looks like he tries to head it, but he actually punches it in with his hand. And the referee totally missed it. He sold it beautifully, and the goal stood up. The English were furious because they saw what he did. Even his teammates saw what he did, and even he knew what he did. But it didn't matter because the goal counted. It was on the board. The other goal was amazingly impressive because he picks up the ball near his side of the field, back by his goal, basically beats the whole English team by himself, and then rifles in this perfect strike. And it's this amazing display of sportsmanship and skill. Imagine like Michael Jordan, where you're just like, that might be one of the best basketball players I've ever seen, like just undeniable talent. But the funny part is when people talk about Argentine football in Maradona, almost no one brings that up, because there's a confidence there that this is part of Argentina. Of course, we're as good as the rest of the world. And of course, we can beat you at that level. They like to talk about the hand of God goal because it's like, yeah, we can beat you on a skill level, but we can also beat you with a little something extra. And there's that kind of just soul and personality to me that when I taste a lot of Argentine wines, it's kind of like that little wink that they give you as you dive into the glass, like, yeah, we're good. And there's something else here that you can't find anywhere else. And to me, that really sums up Agrello, because the wines have that ability to play with anyone in the world. And the Cabernet Sauvignons we're starting to see coming out of there absolutely are world class. The Malbecs are, to me, the definition of Malbec. And then the Petit Verdot, the Cabernet Franc, the Bonarda are definitely worth hunting out. This is one of the great wine spots of the world. So let's stop talking about it. Let's dive into what we have to taste today. We have La Madrid, kind of a fun little story where family-run winery. It's got the very slick label with the open door, which is a shout out to Guillermo, the founder, as he was put on a plane by his grandmother during the height of the Cuban Revolution. And it was basically put on a plane to get to the U.S. for safety and freedom. And to him, it's always that kind of symbol to a door leading to something better. And kind of, to me, I think a really kind of cool, memorable label. And it's a partnership of the La Madrid family. and Hector Doragudi, who is one of the rock star winemakers of Argentina. And whenever I kind of have had La Madrid in the past, and I have it now, love it because they always over-deliver. And let's face it, like right now, all of us need to find that bang for the buck. And this is a winery that every time I try it, I'm always like, oh, this should be like $10 more, or $5. Like it always seems like it drinks in the price category one tier above, but it's always one tier below in terms of pricing. So that is always a great thing, at least for me. I get more excited about value and people over-delivering. Let's face it, it's easy to make a great couple $100 bottle of wine. But when you can make a wine for a fraction of that price that tastes like that, those should be celebrated. So let's taste. And right off the gate, just that kind of beautiful lifted kind of candied violets, that kind of just hint at you, wink at you, kind of like, hey, what are you doing tonight? Let's go check this out. And then underneath that, I hear Doug in my head going, find your three fruits, and nothing but remember the few. So with the fruits, like that kind of blue plum that comes out, blackberries, like but on the vine, not quite ready to pick. And then this kind of wonderful red, kind of white, almost Rainier cherry thing that pops off. And then wood, kind of the cinnamon cardamom thing that shows through, but very subtle, really well integrated. To me, oak is a lot like a chef with garlic. Like a little can go a long way. And there's a point where you can go, whoa, too much garlic. Or salt. And then there's kind of this cool, to me, it's almost oregano, tarragon thing kind of going on in terms of just like light lifted green herbal thing. Onto the palate. I love that about Argentine wines. Like on the nose, it smells like it's going to be really big and huge, fruit forward, crushing. But then you get on the palate and you're like, wow, this is actually really balanced, just really well made and actually kind of refreshing. And it's got this wonderful kind of finish that the tannins kind of kick in at the finish, but they're really refined, elegant tannins, almost this kind of coffee ground, espresso, dare I say, Fernet Branca, beautiful thing going on here. And the fruits are there. It goes a little bit more into just that pure blackberry plum skin thing going on. And then the herbs switch a little bit to a little bit darker, more like rosemary, but like roasted rosemary. And I love this about Argentina because it reminds me a little bit more of like Italian wines than necessarily California or Australia. Because I find sometimes with like Cali and Aussie wines where they smell ripe and then you taste them, you're like, oh my gosh, these are even bigger. Whereas I love about Argentina, especially like textbook examples like this, where it smells right, but it actually reins it in. And I could totally understand why at one point Argentines were drinking 90 liters of wine per person per year, because you could easily drink this at lunch, all throughout lunch, then move on to more of it at dinner. And then just perfect drinking time right now. This is the 2013 Grand Reserva single vineyard that we're drinking. It's ready to go right now. This could easily age another 10 years if you want it to, but why? It's absolutely perfect now. And, a lot of times I get asked, like, when's the best time to drink a wine? How long should I age it? It's like, open the bottle, taste it, and if it's good, then that's the right time. If you're lucky enough to buy wines by the case and it doesn't quite seem right, give it another 6 months. But this is something right now I feel very comfortable drinking at dinner. Doesn't even really need to be decanted. It's just really crushable as it is. So I hope everyone gets a chance to enjoy a bottle, go visit Agrello, go visit Argentina. It's one of those spots that once you get down there, experience the culture, get humbled by the Andes, it is an absolute magical place. And you can easily spend weeks, months down there. It is huge. One of my favorite facts was that if you took Argentina as a country, flattened it out, there's more land than the whole continent of Australia. So get down there, go see it. There's a lot to explore, especially starting with the beautiful wines of Agrello. Cheers.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Buenos dias, buenas tardes, or buenas noches, depending on where you are in the world and what time it is. My name is Evan Goldstein, and I'm a San Francisco-based Master Sommelier who happens to absolutely adore Argentina, our focus for today. Let's talk about Salta. Salta is an area that sits up in the northwest of the country, along with several other very important provinces, and is a beautiful part of the world and one worth going to for sure, should be on your absolute bucket list of places. The name Salta comes from the word sagta, which is an Indian word in the Aymara language, meaning beautiful one. And once you go to this part of the world, you'll understand it. Salta itself is a bit of a niche area, which is to say it's in the very far north. It takes a long time to get to. And even once you get there, if you fly into the namesake airport in the town of Salta, it takes another 3 hours to get there by car. So you have to be very dedicated and very committed. But once you get there, you'll be really happy that you came. I'd like to talk a little bit now about higher altitude. Grapes are a lot like people, which is to say they like really comfortable temperatures. And your typical grapes that sit at lower altitudes, generally on valley floors, on hillsides, are used to temperatures more like us. The higher you go, the more difficult it gets. Grapes, very much like us, when temperatures get a little bit more difficult and sunlight gets a little bit more direct, they have to protect themselves. Now, you and me, we put on sunglasses and sunscreen. Grapes can't do that. So what grapes will do is basically form thicker skins to protect themselves from the UV rays. As you go up higher and higher, and in the case of Salta, you're at altitude somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 feet. In the case of Altura Maxima, you're going to get much thicker skins. This is good because flavor and color and tannin development in red wines all comes from the thicker skins. Now, you may think that high means hot. And that could be the case in some cases, but high also can mean cool in terms of it gets really, really cool during the evening. We call that thermal amplitude or the diurnal exchange, the difference between the hottest of hot and the coldest of cold temperatures over the span of a day. In the case of a grape, that's really important during the summer months. And here in the area of Salta, you can see upwards to 15 plus degrees Celsius of change between night and day. It's also important to remember that the reason it happens this way is that literally for each 510 feet that you go up in altitude, you lose a degree of Celsius. So it gets cooler and cooler and cooler. So almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit for every 510 feet you go up, which means that those extremes are going to get very extreme. Now you add those high extremes, the high altitude, the thin air, the average amount of different sorts of UV rays that you get at those altitudes that you're not going to get anywhere else, and then throw that into the terroir that is Salta, and you're going to get a pretty unique combination. Now, Salta, I think, before we get into the specifics, should be delineated by the fact that it's very high desert, and it's got a very unique base of soils. You have all sorts of things. You have granites, you have slates, et cetera, but you have a lot of quartz or pulverized quartz that comes off as mica. And literally during the day, if you look at the vineyards there, the dappled, speckled, it looks almost like diamonds there. And imagine, if you will, a whole load of mini mirrors, like solar farms, reflecting light back up into the vines. And it gives it a really unique situation and gives a high propensity for ripeness in the fruit here. Malbec is not the only grape grown in Salta, but it's a very, very important one. Before anything, let's break down how grapes work out to that part of the world. It's approximately 60% red fruit in Salta and about 40% white fruit. The most important white grape, as many of us know, is Torrontés. And Torrontés, specifically from Salta, Torrontés salteño, is really wonderful, but sort of on the decline in the world as people are changing palates and drinking more and more Malbec and red wines. While there's a lot of Cabernet and other grapes grown, Malbec is without question the calling card across Salta, and I might add, across all of Argentina. Quick spoiler alert. If you are interested in learning more about Argentinian wine in general, there is no better vehicle than Malbec to do it, because if you go from the top of the country up in Salta and Jujuy, Tucumán, Catamarca, et cetera, and work your way all the way down to Patagonia and go through Mendoza and San Juan and all those places along the way, each time you stop, and have a glass of Malbec, it's going to taste distinctively different based on the provenance of where you are. Very few places in the world have that sort of provenance grape variety focus, and Malbec in Argentina is one of those few. So, Malbec in Salta, what's it like? Given the high altitude, given the high diurnal exchange, given the longer growing season that you get with that high diurnal exchange, you can imagine that you have unique characteristics. And for me, the two things that I always am taken by when I have Salta Malbec are, one, the freshness, the brightness, the acidity, the zestiness of the wines, and two, the intensity of the wines, much of which comes from the thicker, darker pigmented skins we talked about before, but also simply because of the intensity of ripeness and a lot of the nature of the factors of development that you get from being at very, very high altitudes. From a personality standpoint, the wines are very different and sort of unique within the whole platform of what Argentina is all about. Here, they tend to be very savory. That is to say, they're not the sort of bigger fruit-forward wines that you would find, say, in La Rioja or in Mendoza, specifically more towards Mendoza City, in Luján de Cuyo, Agrelo, and places like that, where the wines have a juicy succulence, fat to them, and a richness and a very ripe, almost sweet sense of fruit. Here in Salta, they're very savory. They're much leaner. And if you're trying to make a comparison based on your other Argentinian experiences, then you would probably lean more towards the wines of Uco Valley, which share sort of that leanness and liveness of structure. Here, the fruit character tends to be more restrained. So it's still all about dark plums. It's still all about a lot of those beautiful flavors, the berries and things like that, but you get less of the sort of ripeness and more of the savory elements. Olives are a very important factor here. Florals, but florals coming from herbs. So if you've seen herbs grow in your garden, for example, you know that they pop flowers out at a certain point in time. The fragrance of those flowers, along with the herbs themselves and wildflowers that permeate the entire region of Salta, are going to be much more typical to what you would associate for how the varietal pronounces itself here. It also has a very strong spicy character and a very peppery, sort of somewhere between white and black pepper character that very much delineates the wine and these strong herbal notes. As noted earlier, there were approximately 24 wineries located, or growing people located, more growers than wineries, obviously, in this area of Salta in the upper Calchaquies Valley. One of the areas that I think is worth taking a look for is this new discovery area called Tolombon, which is located further south, somewhere between Tucumán and as you approach in south of Cafayate proper. Here the vineyards sit at closer to like 6,000 plus feet, and it has a very distinctive microclimate. In Tolombon, there's literally only a couple of producers at this point in time, and one of them is the winery that we're going to be tasting from today, which is Estancia Las Cordones. Now, Estancia Las Cordones, estancia is simply the word for ranch or farm. Los Cordones is the word for the cactuses of the region, which literally grow almost 30 feet high. The winemakers and owners of this winery are an interesting international mix. You have Jeff Mosbach, a good friend of mine who's an American, Alejandro Sejanovic, whose nickname is Colo being a name for redhead. You see his ginger hair, you'll understand that. And then the local family that own the property, the Saavedra Ascona family, who have been there for a long time. The wines itself, vineyards are approximately 20 years old, 18 at this point in time having been planted between 2010 and 2011. And the wines, I should say the vines that make this particular Malbec that we're going to be trying, the 2018 vintage, are amongst the highest part of the vineyard itself. Eastern-facing slopes, say that 2 times fast, eastern-facing slopes at about 6,000 feet. The soils here are very shallow, very rocky, and as I alluded to earlier, a very strong desert type of climate. Lack of water here is a big deal. It's one of the reasons why Salta will always be so niche. Not to say that there's not more plantable areas, but simply not enough water to sustain all those areas. So it's never going to be a big production area, and it's always going to be one for looking forward to. This is a beautiful estancia, and the rocks that are in it are oftentimes slate-based. So you see these slate, large stones, and if you see a picture of the winery, you can look at it, and you'll notice that the stones themselves have these striations there, which over time have been filled out with mica and this decomposed quartz, giving it sort of the look and the appearance of the fur of a tiger, hence the name Tigerstone, which is the both the name of the wine, the name of the soil, and if you look at the winery itself, the stones that form the winery proper. This is an area that makes great Malbec. They also make terrific Cabernet, and I've been told there's going to be some wonderful Grenache coming out of there that we'll learn about soon. But let's go ahead and taste the Malbec. The first thing that I note when I smell this is tremendous intensity. The wine really jumps out at you with almost this sort of explosive columnal push. It is quite savory in nature, sort of got a dried plum character, a dried herb character, and some notes of peppers, both like regular peppers, like pasilla peppers or things like that, serrano peppers, but also soft bell peppers as well too. It actually makes you salivate a little bit, which again speaks to the inherent acidity and natural brightness that the wine has, but has this wonderful combination of fruit, minerality, floral characters, and as I said before, this sort of slight savoriness to it. In the palate, the wine has tremendous freshness, got a nice medium body, which belies the fact that the alcohol is actually relatively rich. One of the interesting elements of the modern day school of winemaking up in Salta, which moves away from the school that used to be both, frankly, not in Salta, but all over the country, of these sort of big extracted monster trucks of wines, is both restraint, one, and respect for your terroir, two. So not only does this wine show restraint and elegance at a much higher alcohol level, generous alcohol level, but much more freshness and not as much wood, not as much oak. So there's definitely a veneer of oak on here, which provides some texture, pop some of the spice flavors, but the wine really is all about this sort of stony minerality, this dark savory fruit, and a bright, long finish. What's interesting as well here, the nature of the tannins. Now, the tannins here are present. They definitely grip your palate, but they're more in that sort of powdery, soft side and not necessarily mouth ripping, which a lot of people are fearful of when they see the dark colors that you find in Tannat. So you don't have to, not Tannat, rather Malbec, I should mean, but I think Tannin, I think Tannat. But really just showing, again, an elegance and a power, which again, I think for a lot of people may be oxymoronic when they think about Salta Malbec, but is definitely going to be true in wines of the region and certainly this delicious wine in my glass. On that note, I hope you've enjoyed our little trip into Salta and the north of Argentina. I bid you good drinking, good eating. Nice to have some empanadas along with your Malbec, and good exploring. Be well. Be safe.